Opening the center instantly creates dynamic possibilities and challenges black to commit their own pawns early. Mirroring the central thrust immediately contests the early game's most important square, setting the stage for a symmetrical struggle. Developing the knight aggressively challenges black's central pawn and prepares to castle swiftly. Developing the knight to its natural outpost on c6 efficiently defends the e5 pawn and prepares for queenside expansion. This thrust immediately pressures black's queen's knight, aiming to disrupt their pawn structure and gain central influence. Challenging the bishop's placement immediately, this pawn advance probes white's intentions regarding the bishop's influence on the queen side. Retreating the bishop maintains the pin on the knight and keeps options open for future pawn pushes. Solidifying the center and preparing to challenge white's bishop expansion, a sensible pawn reinforcement after the knight's development. Building a solid pawn center and preparing for d4 offers excellent central control. Developing the bishop to a square that prepares for the eventual castling while also influencing the center. Opening the central files with this pawn thrust immediately challenges black's pawn structure, forcing a decision about how to respond to the looming central pressure and potentially disrupting black's development. Shifting the knight from its active c6 square to the less influential e7 now surrenders the crucial central e5 square, potentially hindering development and creating a cramped position unless a clear plan to redeploy it or support the center arises soon. Returning the bishop to b3 repositions it onto a more active diagonal, eyeing the kingside and preparing for a potential central pawn push. This allows white to contest the d-file more effectively and maintains flexibility for future development. Creating a safe haven for the knight becomes a priority, though it does concede a bit of central influence for now. The queen swings over to e2, preparing to connect the rooks and potentially support a pawn push in the center, while also keeping an eye on the kingside and offering some defense to the e4 pawn if necessary. It's a flexible redeployment aiming for smoother development and more centralized queen activity. Seeking activity, black maneuvers the knight to the kingside, aiming to reinforce the e5 pawn and potentially prepare a kingside pawn storm later, though this positionally feels somewhat passive, allowing white's central pawns to gain more space and influence. Unleashing an assault on the queenside, this maneuver simultaneously bolsters the bishop's influence while preparing for a potential queenside pawn storm, aiming to cramp black's position and restrict their development. Shifting the queen to f6, black prepares to challenge white's central control while also eyeing potential complications on the kingside, hinting at a desire to consolidate pieces before committing to further pawn advances. Unleashing a pawn thrust, white aims to seize central dominion and constrict black's knight maneuvering options. This aggressive pawn advance opens lines for white's pieces and forces black to immediately address the growing spatial advantage, potentially leading to a cramped position if not handled precisely. Opening up the queenside is a bold assertion, challenging white's central grip and creating queenside counterplay. This pawn push aggressively expands black's queenside presence, aiming to dislodge white's bishop and potentially create passed pawns later. It's a double-edged sword, however, as it weakens the queenside pawn structure somewhat and sacrifices immediate central engagement. The bishop on b3 is now directly attacked, forcing white to make a decision about its placement. Repositioning the queen to a more active square, this maneuver aims to support the e4 pawn while simultaneously preparing to challenge the queenside advance. The knight embarks on a daring journey to the queenside, seeking to disrupt white's spatial advantage and potentially attack the bishop on b3. This maneuver aims to neutralize white's control over the central dark squares and hints at a potential queenside pawn storm. Strategically repositioning the bishop to d1 aims to prepare for a potential kingside expansion while simultaneously defending the e2 square and creating a clearer path for the queen to potentially shift elsewhere. This maneuver often anticipates future pawn advances or a rerouting of pieces to more active squares, offering a subtle shift in the game's dynamic rather than an immediate aggressive stroke. Stepping back from the skirmish, black consolidates the bishop, aiming to untangle the knight currently hogging the e7 square. a move that acknowledges the cramped queenside but prioritizes central development over immediate pawn advances. Unlocking the kingside, the intention is to prepare a kingside pawn storm or reposition the knight to a more active square, potentially f1 or h1, to participate in the battle, while simultaneously creating a safe haven for the king behind a solid pawn shield. Solidifying the kingside and preparing for potential central action, castling tucks the monarch away safely behind a shield of pawns and minor pieces, initiating a more structural phase of the game. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside, white boldly seeks to shatter black's defensive pawn structure and expose their monarch. This aggressive pawn thrust is a double-edged sword. While it promises attacking chances, it also creates weaknesses and could prematurely weaken white's own king if black can find counterplay. The ensuing skirmish will likely be decided by which player can better manage the ensuing spatial imbalances and activate their pieces to exploit the created imbalances. Black aims to seize control of the open c-file, anticipating a potential pawn break or piece activity on that flank, while simultaneously offering the knight a more active post. Sharpening the attack, white activates a bishop with tempo, challenging black's queen and aiming to disrupt its defensive coordination. Opening the h-file with the pawn grab disrupts black's pawn chain and creates an immediate tension, but it does so at the significant cost of allowing white's bishop to penetrate your queenside and potentially create outposts for their pieces. Consider how this unbalances the queenside structure, and whether black can effectively defend the newly exposed king or exploit the open file for counterplay before white's pieces consolidate their positional advantage. Capturing the pawn on g5 rips open the h-file, creating immediate dynamism and potential for your king's safety to become a pressing concern. A sharp recapture, the queen stepping back onto the board, aiming to disrupt white's central pawn mass and challenge the bishop that has encroached so far. This decision instantly escalates the tactical skirmish, forcing white to confront the immediate threat to their own king's safety as the central files become critically open. The strategic implications are immense. Will black's queen find a safe haven, or will this aggressive repositioning create a dangerous target, inviting a swift counterattack? The game's complexion has dramatically shifted, moving from a quiet maneuvering battle to a direct confrontation where every tempo counts. A bold sacrifice is made, yielding the central knight for a pawn and initiating a dramatic shift in material balance. Observe how this exchange radically simplifies the pawn structure on white's kingside, potentially opening avenues for the rook on h1, while simultaneously creating immediate tactical questions for black regarding the exposed queen and the compromised pawn shield around their monarch. The immediate recapture of the knight reopens lines and introduces tactical possibilities, though it also exposes black's king somewhat by the removal of a key defender from the queenside and the opening of the h-file. Black must now carefully consider how to solidify their structure and defend against potential central advances or queenside pressure from white, who still holds a central pawn majority. Developing the knight to the queenside, aims to establish queenside pressure and potentially target the weakened a6 pawn, while also preparing to contest the file if it opens. Challenging the central pawn structure, black seeks to unlock the queenside and gain attacking momentum. Initiating a decisive exchange, white boldly removes black's central pawn and opens the d-file, creating immediate tension and potential attacking lines. Black retrieves their bishop, a necessary repositioning to defend the weakened kingside and prepare for potential counterplay on the queenside, though white's central pawn push has undeniably constricted black's piece activity. Unleashing a tactical thunderbolt, white sacrifices material to rip open the king's defenses, a bold gambit that injects immediate venom into the position. A surprising retreat. Black, after surrendering the bishop pair and enduring an exposed king situation, now voluntarily repositions its remaining bishop to a seemingly passive square, relinquishing attacking potential and central influence, perhaps signaling a desire to consolidate or prepare for a defensive setup rather than immediate counterplay. Seizing the open g-file now provides white a direct assault path towards black's vulnerable king, while simultaneously preparing to exploit the misplaced bishop on h6. Exchanging the dark-squared bishop simplifies the position, removing a key defender from the kingside and opening the h-file for potential infiltration. The board just opened up dramatically. White's queen now aggressively eyes black's kingside weaknesses after the king's pawn structure has been fractured. Reclaiming a piece and centralizing activity, this knight's journey to c6 simultaneously bolsters the pawn chain and prepares for potential central breakthroughs, disrupting White's carefully constructed queenside pressure and eyeing the weakened d4 square. Reinforcing the central d-file control becomes paramount here, aiming to restrict black's rook activity and prepare for potential pawn advances. Prying open the queenside pawn structure with b4 creates significant dynamic potential, aiming to disrupt White's central control and establish a foothold for black's rooks on the queenside. The knight's journey to the queenside signals a strategic repositioning, aiming to contest the open c-file and bolster the queenside pawn structure. Shattering the pawn structure opens a vital diagonal for your bishop, but surrenders important central control. The open b-file now presents a significant strategic battleground, and this recapture firmly asserts White's claim over it, simultaneously initiating a potential blockade of black's advanced pawns while opening lines for White's rooks. The knight's audacious leap to d4 injects a potent dose of central instability, forcing White to confront an immediate tactical reckoning or suffer a positional concession. Seizing the initiative on the queenside, this knight jumps into an advanced outpost, threatening to disrupt black's entire pawn structure while simultaneously eyeing the vulnerable d4 square.